Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for providing me with the opportunity to speak to you today about a solution to an issue of a lack of political representation, gender quotas. Recently, the United Nations has taken a strong stance on the importance of women's rights internationally. There have been many inspiring speeches on this subject by influential women such as Malala Yousafzai on the right to education, Emma Watson on the support for feminism, and Hillary Clinton on equal access to basic human and legal rights. An issue that has been brought into the attention of the public recently, partly due to Canada's new Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's appointment of a gender-equal cabinet, is the equal representation and participation of women in political positions of power. Although there has been much backlash and doubt surrounding gender quotas, I am here today to clarify these doubts and advocate for their use, as there is much evidence as to their benefits for all, no matter the gender. There are three main questions regarding gender quotas that critics demand answered. Is it ethical? Is it necessary? And what will be the impact if they are put into place? When discussing whether or not to implement a policy that will have a large effect on the public, it is obviously important to consider their issues, opinions, and doubts. As those who have been following the media of backlash of Prime Minister Trudeau's decision are sure to know, there has been a large amount of skepticism surrounding the merit of those appointed to his cabinet. Those who are not in favor of the gender quota demand whether or not there are candidates better credentialed for the job, who may not be getting it simply because they do not fit the quota's expectations. My question for the critics is as follows. Is merit an attainable goal? How do you measure merit? Has there ever been a political assembly chosen solely for their merit? At least in Canada, location and language has always been a factor in the appointment of the cabinet. I cannot imagine that in the 193 countries represented here today, there aren't other considerations taken into account when choosing their members for parliament, other than merit. Politics in the United States, for example, are influenced immensely by money. In fact, in the 435 House elections, 95% of candidates who outspent their opponents won. Another bone of contention seen often in news articles is the question of whether or not this is discrimination. The answer is yes. By definition, gender quotas discriminate against those most often represented in governmental structures. It is not, however, uncalled for. Reverse discrimination, most commonly known as affirmative action, has long been used in workplaces in order to promote equality and level the playing field for better opportunities of representation. Randall Kennedy, a Harvard law professor, advocates for affirmative action in his book, For Discrimination, Race, Affirmative Action, and the Law. In his book, Kennedy writes that while the stigma attached to affirmative action is a serious problem, it is not serious enough to cast the policy down. While gender quotas do have critics, the result of this decision in Canada, a respected and democratic country, was overwhelmingly positive. Results demonstrated that the majority polled believed this quota would send a positive message about politics. The majority of all ages and genders believed that the Prime Minister had the right idea and his decision to make his cabinet 50-50, and that they backed the policy completely. This is not only a Canadian phenomenon. In India in 1993, gender quotas were enacted in Indian states that made it mandatory for 1/3 of all leadership positions to be reserved for women. Studies surrounding this amendment to the Constitution report that there was no form of backlash from the citizens, and over a period of time, there was an increase in understanding and appreciation for women, owing to the fact that their ideals and views as to how women perform adapted. Therefore, it is clear that although there are public doubts as to gender quotas, they are largely unfounded, and as there is much positive feedback from the citizens wherever they are implemented. While countries such as Rwanda, Sweden, and Iceland have fantastic female representation, there is still a need for change in numerous others. Quotas are therefore necessary in order to bring development internationally. There are both benefits and costs to gender quotas, but all in all, the costs are not as significant and can be overlooked. Critics have complained about issues of cultural diversity and the negative effects gender quotas might have on female political leaders. The issues of cultural diversity are largely unfounded, as there is no reason why women being chosen for positions of power shouldn't be culturally diverse in the first place. The argument that there could be negative effects on the women is based solely on a pessimistic prediction of negative backlash from the community involved. But as seen by both Canadian and Indian feedback, so far communities have not only appreciated the decision, but grown from it. Benefits far outweigh the costs for this policy. There have been positive responses from citizens who have embraced this as an opportunity to change their views about women, which leads to a reduction in gender discrimination. Female politicians have been shown to value social welfare and legal protection policies far more than their male counterparts. Female representation in the government allows for an increase of information on statistical discrimination of women, information difficult for male politicians to provide accurately. Most importantly, female representation provides motivation for women who are interested in pursuing politics as a possible career. Even if the critics are right, and those best qualified are not being given the job, it is still incredibly important to get different genders and ethnicities into politics so as to increase diversity and skill of the candidates for the future. Studies have proven that when people see those similar to themselves in new positions, they are better able to believe they can also pursue a position of that caliber. This is called the role model effect. By broadening the representation, young women considering this path as a career are able to see themselves in positions not previously occupied by women and gain confidence to participate. Most importantly, we must consider democracy, one of the most important concepts ever to have been created. As all of you gathered here know and understand, democracy is very important to the United Nations. Aren't the leaders of a democracy supposed to be representatives of the people they govern? How can this be true if 79% of the world's politicians are male, but 51% of the world's population is female? It is not proper representation, and therefore democracy, if the minority is running the government. But unfortunately, this is a problem for many countries, including the United States of America and the United Kingdom, where in both their parliaments, only 20% of Congress and the House of Commons consists of female politicians. As stated on the United Nations Global Issues webpage, democracy is a universally recognized ideal and is one of the core values and principles of the United Nations. Therefore, it should be a priority to ensure all nations have the proper representation that they deserve. Now that the issues have been addressed, it is of course important to clarify what quotas have done to improve countries in the past and what they can do to improve countries in the future. Aside from the obvious, which is the multiplication of female representation and number of women in leadership positions, there have been many other achievements. In the countries like India, where they have been implemented, gender quotas have resulted in a clear increase of diversity of policies being created and the amount of female political participation, as well as a decrease in the amount of discrimination towards women. In Mumbai, after the quotas were put into place, there was a 7.4% of increase in female political participation. In fact, there was even a 25% increase in the likelihood that women in villages would speak if their political leader was female. In West Bengal, the community leaders had the ability to decide where they should place their investments of public funds. The female politicians were found to implement policies relating directly to community needs, such as drinking water policies, which differed from those of male legislators, who tended to focus mainly on economics. The policies male leaders tended to implement are still being enacted, but now there is a wider variety of legislation being introduced. Currently, the United Nations is taking action through the Beijing Fourth World Conference on Women, the Millennium Development Goals, and training for female candidates. The Beijing Fourth World Conference focuses on full female participation and equal access to positions of political power and decision-making for women. The Millennium Development Goals measure the equality of women through their number of seats in parliament, and the training for female candidates includes voter and civic education and sensitization campaigns on gender equality. While these conferences and goals are only a few among many attempts to deliver equal rights and help situate more women into politics, there is still an enormously long way to go before we reach our end goal, equality. It is seemingly unfeasible, but I promise, it is attainable. Therefore, please, ladies and gentlemen, who have been considerate enough to listen to my attempts to clarify the role of the gender quota. Consider this plan thoughtfully and with open minds. The evidence of its success is overwhelming. I can only hope that its propagation will be just as triumphant.